Mark, a grieving father, Claire, a stepmother with a hidden darkness, and Ethan, a disabled boy whose silent suffering ended in tragedy. Together their lives spiraled into a shocking story of cruelty, betrayal, and deadly revenge that shook an entire community. In a quiet suburban neighborhood where rows of nearly identical houses stood side by side, one family seemed unremarkable at first glance. Mark, a hard-working father in his early 40s, lived there with his son Ethan and his new wife, Claire. To outsiders, they looked like a picture of stability, a man who had rebuilt his life after loss, a woman who had stepped into the role of stepmother, and a child who, despite his challenges, was cared for. But appearances have a way of hiding the darkest truths. Mark had lost his first wife years earlier, leaving him as the sole guardian of Ethan. The boy was 12, but lived with a severe disability that made him dependent on others for nearly everything. He struggled to walk without assistance, spoke softly in broken words, and relied on gentle patience from those around him. Mark adored his son and devoted himself to balancing long work shifts with caring for Ethan's needs. The bond between them was strong, but the exhaustion was equally heavy. When Mark met Claire, he believed fate had given him another chance at family. Claire arrived with charm and confidence. She seemed patient with Ethan at first, showering him with gifts and encouraging words. Mark was drawn to her warmth, convinced she could bring stability and love to their lives. Marriage followed quickly, and soon she moved into the home where Ethan had grown up. Neighbors smiled when they saw the trio together in the yard or driving off to church. They thought the father had finally found happiness again, but cracks began to show, faint at first. Ethan was seen less and less outside the house. Where he once sat on the porch with his father, waving shyly at neighbors, he now stayed indoors. Mark explained it away as his son being tired or under the weather. Claire always had answers, and she delivered them so smoothly that no one questioned her. Still, people whispered that something didn't feel right. The boy seemed thinner. His eyes, once full of quiet curiosity, looked sunken and dim when glimpsed through the window. Behind those closed doors, life was far from the image painted for the world. Claire resented the responsibility that came with Ethan's condition. While Mark worked long hours to keep the household afloat, she was left alone with a boy she saw as a constant reminder of limitations and sacrifice. Ethan needed compassion, but what awaited him in the new family dynamic was something entirely different. The house that once echoed with the soft laughter of a child and the steady love of a father was slowly becoming a place of silence and hidden suffering, and no one, not even Mark, realized how dangerous that silence would become. Claire's role as Ethan's caregiver quickly shifted from what seemed like patience to cold indifference. At first, she performed the basic duties, feeding him, helping him dress, and ensuring his medication was taken. But soon her actions became careless, then cruel. She began skipping his meals, sometimes leaving him with nothing more than a slice of bread or a glass of water, while she ate heartily in another room. The boy, who was already fragile, began losing weight at an alarming rate. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, and his once gentle face took on a hollow look. When Mark came home from long shifts, Ethan tried to mask his discomfort, shrinking into the background as Claire dominated conversations. She painted herself as a devoted stepmother, always eager to explain away any concerns. Bruises on Ethan's arms were brushed off as accidents from falls. His exhaustion was excused as part of his disability. Mark, blinded by his trust in her and weighed down by exhaustion, accepted these explanations. Behind closed doors, however, Claire's frustration grew darker. She began locking Ethan in his bedroom for hours, using his disability against him. The boy could not escape, could not call for help, and could not defend himself. His room, once a place of safety, became a prison. Nights were the worst. Neighbors sometimes reported hearing faint noises through the walls, soft cries, muffled sounds that faded before anyone could place them. No one imagined that a child in such desperate need of care was instead enduring torment. The cruelty escalated in small but devastating ways. She withheld his medication, knowing it would cause him pain. She taunted him when he struggled to complete simple tasks. She punished him for accidents he could not control. Every day became a new form of suffering for Ethan, who had no choice but to endure in silence. Doctors began noticing troubling signs during his checkups. His weight loss, his frequent injuries, and his declining health raised questions, but Claire always attended these appointments with rehearsed explanations, and her composure made her seem trustworthy. Each concern was dismissed as the natural course of his disability. The system failed him, unable to see past the mask Claire presented to the world. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's condition worsened. The bright boy, who once clung to the comfort of his father's presence, was disappearing before anyone's eyes. His spirit dimmed under the weight of cruelty. The suffering he endured, hidden from the man who loved him most, was leading toward an ending no one yet imagined. The end came quietly, without warning, on a sweltering summer afternoon. The air inside the house was thick and still, but in Ethan's small locked bedroom the silence carried a weight no one could ignore. His frail body had been breaking down for weeks. The constant neglect, the missed meals, the bruises, and the pain had pushed him past the point of endurance. That day his breathing grew shallow, his movements slower, until finally there was nothing left. The boy who had once smiled shyly at neighbors and clung to his father's hand was gone, his final moments spent alone behind a locked door. Claire found him but showed no sign of panic. Instead, she sat in the living room waiting for Mark to return from work, her story already forming in her mind. She would say it was sudden, that Ethan's condition had finally caught up with him. When Mark stepped through the door that evening, tired from his long shift, he was met not with the cheerful chaos of home, but with the cold announcement that his son had stopped breathing. At first, Mark was numb. The grief hit him like a storm, leaving him broken and confused. He struggled to understand how his boy, who had been alive and fighting just that morning, could suddenly be gone. Claire stood by him, calm and collected, offering words of comfort that sounded rehearsed. Something in her composure unsettled him, but grief clouded his judgment. The police were called, and Ethan's body was taken for examination. While Claire presented her story with confidence, the autopsy told a far different tale. The medical examiner uncovered injuries that could not be explained by illness or accident. Ethan's body bore the marks of repeated abuse, bruises in different stages of healing, evidence of malnutrition, and untreated injuries that revealed long-term suffering. His death was not sudden at all. It had been the result of prolonged cruelty. For Mark, the truth landed like a crushing weight. The woman he had trusted to protect his son had been the very source of his suffering. The guilt overwhelmed him as he realized that while he worked to provide for his family, his boy had been living in torment. The silence of that house, the stillness of that locked bedroom, would haunt him forever. Ethan's death was no accident. It was murder, hidden behind the mask of motherhood. Grief transformed into something darker as the days passed. Mark could not sleep, haunted by the images painted in the autopsy report. Every detail replayed in his mind like a nightmare he could not escape. The bruises, the starvation, the years of hidden pain. He pictured Ethan alone in that locked room, reaching out for help that never came. The guilt consumed him. He had trusted Claire, the woman who should have been his partner in love and care, and in doing so he had failed his son. That knowledge was unbearable. Claire carried on as if nothing had happened. While the investigation slowly unfolded, she maintained an air of innocence. She attended brief interviews with detectives, denying any wrongdoing and presenting herself as a grieving stepmother. Her composure enraged Mark. He saw in her calm face not sorrow, but cold calculation. He feared the system would believe her act, and that justice would slip through his hands. The thought of her walking free, unpunished for what she had done, made his anger boil into something uncontrollable. Nights became the most dangerous for Mark. Alone in the dark, he stared at the framed photos of Ethan, remembering his son's smile, his gentle presence, and his quiet strength despite his struggles. The house was silent now, the absence of Ethan echoing through every room. The more Mark replayed the past, the more his grief turned into determination. He told himself that justice delayed was justice denied. The law was slow, and his trust in it was gone. One evening, unable to contain the storm inside him any longer, Mark walked to the small safe in his bedroom closet. Inside lay a handgun he had owned for years but never used. His hands shook as he held it, but his mind was steady with a chilling clarity. This was no longer about law or courtrooms. This was about a father reclaiming dignity for a son whose cries had been ignored. When Claire returned home later that night, she was met not with words, but with the sound of a gunshot breaking the silence. Mark's grief had hardened into action, and in a single irreversible moment the balance shifted. Claire, the woman who had tormented his child, lay lifeless. The father who had once vowed only to protect now carried the weight of blood on his own hands. The gunshot ended Claire's life, but it did not bring peace to the house. When neighbors heard the sound, panic spread quickly across the quiet street. Within minutes, police cars filled the driveway, their flashing lights painting the walls of the home where so much suffering had taken place. Officers entered cautiously, unsure of what they would find. Inside, they saw Mark sitting motionless, the weapon resting on the floor beside him. He did not resist. He did not flee. He simply waited, his face etched with a mixture of sorrow and grim resolve. When asked what had happened, his words were simple. He had done what the law could not. The arrest was swift, but the story was far from over. News of the case spread rapidly, capturing national attention. A father had killed his wife, but beneath that shocking headline lay a deeper tragedy. A disabled child tortured to death in the one place he should have been safest. Public opinion split sharply. Some condemned Mark for taking a life, insisting that no one had the right to decide justice on their own terms. Others saw him as a grieving father pushed beyond the limits of human endurance, a man who had watched the system fail his son and acted out of unbearable anguish. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and heavy. Prosecutors described Mark as a killer who had chosen revenge over law. They painted a picture of a man unable to control his rage, warning that society could not excuse vigilantism no matter how tragic the circumstances. Yet the defense told a different story, one of betrayal and loss. They reminded the jury of Ethan's suffering, of the signs that had been ignored, and of the cruel reality that justice might never have been served if Mark had not acted. The trial became more than a legal battle. It became a moral debate. Was Mark a murderer, or was he a father seeking justice in the only way he knew how? The community remained divided, struggling to reconcile the horror of Ethan's death with the violence of Claire's. No verdict could erase the pain. Ethan was gone, his short life stolen by cruelty. Claire was gone, her life ended by the very man who once trusted her, and Mark was left to face the consequences of his choice, carrying both the unbearable weight of grief and the irreversible stain of bloodshed. In the end, the story stood as a haunting reminder of how unchecked cruelty can destroy not just one life, but an entire family.